Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and I'm coming to you today asking a very serious question. Can Marvel Studios bounce back? And when I say bounce back to what we have grown to love from this film franchise. We are 35 films in, not counting the Disney Plus shows that has been released over the past 5 years. Just cinematically, just on the big screen, 35 films, about to go into the 36th this upcoming weekend with Thunderbolts. But we've got 35 films, and we've hit kind of a wall here, with a lot of uh, lackluster returns in investment, man. I mean, ever since Endgame, and that's pretty much the point that Marvel. It feels like Marvel was just throwing stuff against the wall, seeing what stuck after that. They had no clear direction, and I'm not saying that they didn't, but it just feels that way. Me as a kid growing up, deeply into comics, love comics, and when comic book movies started to kind of take off in the early 2000s, I was like, oh man, finally. I was like The Rock. Finally, we've got good comic book adaptations. Because prior to that, yes, we had Superman the movie, Christopher Reeves, Richard Donner directing, the late great Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. Yes, that was awesome for its time, but it wasn't the greatest thing. When you look back on it, it wasn't the greatest. But Christopher Reeve's adaptation of Superman as Clark Kent makes it such an excellent film. Superman 2 also, that's the first one I saw. Ironically enough, I saw Superman 2 before I saw Superman 1. It's weird. It's due to my birth. My birth was right between both movies. And for some strange reason, when I got old enough, I watched Superman 2 first. But that's neither here nor there. We fast forward, the next real, I guess you could say, big comic book movie we got was Batman from 1989 with Michael Keaton as Batman, Tim Burton directing the movie, and it was a cultural phenomenon. It was a global phenomenon, a pop culture phenomenon, and it took the world by storm. And that franchise, that film series, up until it just went off the rails with Batman, Batman and Robin, but it was an excellent comic book franchise. And Marvel was, they didn't have anything around the time. I think the only thing we got from Marvel cinematically was Howard the Duck. And that was in the 80s. And that has been described as the worst movie, not comic book movie, one of the worst movies ever made. I always liked Howard the Duck. Yeah, I can point out now that it's stupid, but when I was a kid, that was exciting to me to see a duck run around that can talk and interact with humans. And so hey, I didn't even know it was a comic book when I was growing up. I think it was later in life when I found out it was a comic book. Actually, to be honest with you, I saw the comic, but I thought the comic book was based off of the movie. They were like, oh, the movie, so we're going to make a comic book character. No, the book came first. But anyways, that was it for Marvel. For years, they were talking about making a Spider-Man movie. For years, we saw talks of a Credible Hulk movie, and that was it. That was about as far as it got. And now, if you want to count this Captain America movie that came out in I think around 90, 91, somewhere up in there. If you want to count that, which wasn't even released in theaters, it fine, you can count it. If you want to count the Fantastic Four film that they made around that same time that nobody has saw, it's fine. You can count that as well. But Marvel, Marvel just we weren't getting anything going at Marvel Studios or Marvel Films at the time. And so we fast forward to the early 2000s, and we finally get the announcement of a Spider-Man movie. And it came from the unlikely of places with James Cameron. James Cameron was going to make a Spider-Man movie right after he had finished making Titanic. And he had worked on the outline, story outline, and everything was moving forward. I think Leonardo DiCaprio was going to play Spider-Man. Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to be Doc Ock, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they was setting it up to be something awesome, and I was excited. I think I was keeping up with it because this is pre-internet, and I was keeping up with it by reading the Wizard books. Y'all remember that magazine with Wizard? Yeah, that's how I was keeping up with the production and everything of that because I was super excited. Spider-Man is one of my favorite characters. And so to see him in live action, I was hyped up for it. Well, that fell through, and Sam Raimi took over, and the rest, as they say, is history. Tobey Maguire was cast as Peter Parker. William Dafoe was cast as Norman Osborn, and we were off and running. And Marvel finally had kind of stuck their flag in the film world because that movie was amazing for me at the time, and it still is. You can go back and watch that very first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire and really appreciate it for what it was. It really didn't date that much. It's not that dated. It is in parts. Don't get me wrong. It is in parts, but it was still good. It still holds up for the most part. Spider-Man 2 is even better. Arguably one of the best comic book movies ever made. Spider-Man versus Doc Ock, another character I'm used to just have fantasies about seeing in live action, and finally getting to see it in live action was a joy. And so we got these films, and I got kind of ahead of myself, before we got Spider-Man and all of that. What really broke open the Marvel universe, not the MCU that we know now, but what really broke open this universe for comic book movies was Blade. Blade was the film that, once again, I knew of the character. I didn't read any Blade issues, but I've read issues where Blade popped up. He was in a Spider-Man run for a little while when they were going after what's his name? Jared Leto played him in the movie. Man, why am I blanking on his name? That's how bad that movie was. But anyway, it'll come to me. But yeah, they teamed up, and I knew a little bit about Blade. But I was a big fan of Wesley Snipes. So when that movie came out and, just took the world by storm, I was like, oh man, this is awesome. Then you get Blade 2, and unfortunately we got Blade Trinity, but those first two Blade movies were just bangers. I was like, man, I think we're on the right track. And X-Men came along not too long after that. The first X-Men film from Bryan Singer in the year 2000. And, anybody who knows me, X-Men was my jam. I love X-Men to this day. Love X-Men because I love the storytelling in X-Men because there's so much more. It isn't just these costume mutants running around fighting against oppression and whatnot. It's so much more to it, and it's such an exciting story that has been told for, I don't know, 60, 70 years or whatever. But it is an exciting story. Really love it. Can't wait to see it play out in the MCU, hopefully soon. But yeah, those films started coming out and they were hit and miss. You get a good one, then a bad one, a good one, then a bad one, and very inconsistent. But in the year 2008, business picked up. Marvel Studios decided they were going to go all in. They were facing bankruptcy, and so they decided to go all in. They had already licensed out a lot of their characters from the comics. They didn't have the rights. Now it's crazy that Marvel didn't have the rights to their own characters, but they were broke, and so they had to license off their characters in order to survive. They didn't have the Fantastic Four. They didn't have X-Men. They didn't have Blade. They didn't have Spider-Man. They didn't have their major characters. And so they wanted to launch their own studio. And in 2008, they released Iron Man. And Jon Favreau, really good actor, if you don't realize it, but he is a really good actor, funny guy. Um, he directed this film. And prior to this, he directed Elf and it was another film. It was like a Jumanji ripoff. I can't think of the name of that either. I'm blanking today. But he directed those two films, and I was interested. I was curious to see how this would play out because I liked Iron Man and in the comics, and I always compared him to Batman because Batman is my all-time overall favorite comic book character. It was just Iron Man didn't have as tragic of a backstory as Bruce Wayne, but still interesting. They both billionaires. Neither of them have superpowers, but they found a way to exist in this superpower worlds that they both live in. And I always often compared the two. That's why I kind of followed Iron Man a little bit more in Marvel comics. But they took a big risk in making this film, and then they made the biggest risk of all by casting Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. And this is the Robert Downey Jr. who is just a couple of years removed from being in prison, from getting in trouble with the law, with the drugs and the drinking and back and forth in court and in jail and all this other stuff. But nobody has ever, no matter what he was going through in his personal life, nobody ever questioned his acting. The dude is a phenomenal actor. I think the film that really brought him back to prominence was Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And that movie was so good. And he was so good in it, along with Val Kilmer, R.I.P. That was just a phenomenal movie. Small little movie, but I think that was what helped catapult him back to the status where people were like, okay, Robert's back. He could still do it. And it helped him land the role. Now, it wasn't easy. There was pushback, but eventually they were won over. And here we are, 35 films of going on to 36 films later, and it wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Robert Downey Jr. And we're going to touch in on a little later. He's still a part of the MCU. But spoiler alert, not as Tony Stark. But that's neither here nor there. That movie did phenomenal in the box office. It set up a whole universe and set up I get not the invention, because they always have post-credit scenes in movies, but not in every single movie. But it really planted its flag in the post-credit scene, setting up something bigger down the line or for the next film down the line. And when Samuel L. Jackson popped up with the eye patch at the very end of that film in the post-credit scene as Nick Fury, because at that point in the comics, they had changed Nick Fury from being a white man to being a black man. And not just any black man, but they modeled him, the character of Nick Fury in the comics, they modeled him as Samuel L. Jackson. So when it came time to play him on the big screen, well, let's give Samuel L. Jackson a call. And he answered, thank God. And the rest, as they say, is history. We were off and running with The Incredible Hulk, which came out a few months after that. Iron Man 2 a couple of years after that. Thor, Captain America, and then we got the Avengers. the culmination of all of these characters. A film that I thought was virtually impossible, impossible to achieve on the big screen because you're asking multiple actors, multiple characters to share the screen with one another. And they did it, man. They pulled it off. And that movie went on to make $1 billion, and it wrapped up phase one. And I never understood the phase. Well, at least I didn't understand the phase thing early on. I'm like, what does phase mean? But it was just sections of this cinematic universe because we're going full steam ahead with a larger plot. All right, cool. But then at the end of the Avengers, we in this post credit scene, we saw Thanos, and everybody lost their collective mind. And it was like, oh my God, we're actually moving on to some big things, you know, if you read the comics. And so we move on to phase two. We get Iron Man 3. We get Thor, the Dark World, which a lot of people not so much liked. You know, it wasn't their favorite at that point. That was the one swing and miss from Marvel, even though it was financially successful. But a lot of the fans still don't like it to this day. I didn't mind it, but it definitely wasn't the best. It was the worst up to this point in the MCU. Then you get Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which a lot of people still now consider the best MCU film, probably the best comic book movie. I've heard that argument, and I'm not even gonna fight it. I don't agree with it, but I'm not gonna fight you with it because it is an excellent movie. Guardians of the Galaxy, which just expand this universe literally, by going into the galaxy, by going into this world, and with characters that nobody knew. Nobody knew who Star-Lord was. Nobody knew who Drax the Destroyer was. Nobody knew about Groot and Rocket Raccoon, the talking raccoon and a talking tree. They really swung for the fence, for the fence with that. And lo and behold, it worked. It worked. That movie was amazing. After that, we get another Avengers film, Avengers: Age of Ultron, which a little skittish, a little skittish. I had a lot of hopes for that because Ultron is a very what's the word I could describe as a villain? Well, he's a cold-blooded villain in the comics, and so I didn't like this adaptation of that character. I didn't like this version of the character, and the film suffered because all Avengers: Age of Ultron did was set up phase 3. That's all it was there for. It was not his separate movie. It was just a commercial for phase 3. And so that I didn't too much care for it. After that, you get Ant-Man, and that wrapped up phase 2, right? So we get to phase 3. And phase 3 is when they really went all in. Now we're steamrolling towards the bigger kind of culmination here. We start phase 3 with Captain America: Civil War, which, you know, you can also retitle as Avengers 2.5. You had Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, which the rights are still with Sony, but they shared it due to some deal which worked out for both parties, I believe. Spider-Man Homecoming was awesome. You had Thor Ragnarok, which also was awesome. I'm telling you, phase 3 was just banging, man. phase 3 was banging. After Ragnarok, you got Black Panther. Black freaking Panther, and nobody saw that coming. Nobody thought that movie was going to be that good. The first Marvel film out of all the films I just named to be nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Didn't win, but it was nominated, and that within his own right is an amazing task. It did win an Academy Award for best score, best costume design, I believe, or set design, probably both. But it did rack up some awards. So uh, kudos to them. We go from that to Avengers Infinity War. And reading the comics, I knew what Infinity War was. I knew what the Infinity Saga is. And I know what happens at the end of Infinity War, but honestly, it never really dawned on me until I was watching the movie that wait, I think they're gonna do this. They're actually gonna do this. And when Thanos got all of the stones and made the snap, I just I turned to my wife. I can't believe they did it. I, I can't believe they did it. I was so shocked that the villain won, that Thanos won, the Avengers lost. And spoiler alert, I like Infinity War more than Endgame. Believe it or not, that is I enjoyed that more because of the stakes involved and what happened at the end. It was so much of an emotional impact. Don't get me wrong, there was a big emotional swing in Endgame, but this one just hit different. Um, a couple of months after that, you get Ant-Man and the Wasp, which wasn't all that good. I mean, it was all right, but coming off of Infinity War, it it was just bad placement in my in my humble opinion. Not America, but Captain Marvel came next, which was fine. It was fine. It didn't move the needle either way, but good on them. And then we get Endgame. Then we get Avengers Endgame. And it was named Endgame for a reason because that was the end. That was the end of the Infinity Saga. That was the end. Well, technically they count the film after this, Spider-Man Far From Home, the end of the Infinity Saga, but it ended with Endgame with me. That was it. I mean, we wrapped up our original Avengers. Tony died. Cap went to live a happy life with Peggy. Thor went on his a self-discovery journey, and Black Widow died, and so on and so forth. I mean, everybody pretty much moved on, and that was that. They went to war with the galaxy's probably biggest bad there is, and they defeated them. They had to go back in time and do a time heist to do it, but they did it. And so it was cool. It was an actual a great end to this saga. And so you get Far From Home, which was good. All of the Spider-Man movies were good. And so this is where it started to kind of turn for me. This is where it really started to go like, where do we go from here? How can you exceed what you accomplished in those first three phases, in that entire saga? Because everything was just brilliantly done. Nothing was rushed. They took their time. All the characters were developed. You had a villain that was sprinkled throughout this little 10-year journey that they went on in this saga. And so everything had a proper payoff, a proper build, and a proper payoff. And so we move into the multiverse saga. And when they announced that, I was very skeptical because I'm not a big multiverse person. I didn't care for it in the comics, and I really didn't care for it here in the films, and the audiences didn't either. Now, granted, a lot of factors kind of hampered this saga, kind of hampered the films that were being released here on after. It affected the quality of some of the films. It did. I'm not gonna be naive and say like, oh man, Marvel just put it on cruise control. No, it was a lot of things that played a part, and why this wasn't as successful of a saga as the Infinity Saga. The Multiverse Saga started off, we're in a pandemic. You have films that was slated to come out in 2020 that couldn't come out. Films that were scheduled to start filming in 2020 couldn't start filming. Films or shows that were in the middle of production had to stop filming. The world stopped in 2020. And so a lot of that affected this saga, as well as our lives personally and everything else in the world. So I'm not just saying like, woe is me to Marvel. Everybody went through it in 2020. It was horrible. So Marvel is no exception. So everything got pushed back. We had to roll over with WandaVision. We had Falcon and the Winter Soldier on both of those shows were on Disney Plus, and I think Disney Plus kind of hurt as well because Disney Plus shows, well, we're about to witness that this weekend with Thunderbolts. There are characters in Thunderbolts that we haven't seen unless you watched some of these Disney Plus shows. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. You're probably gonna go there and wonder, who is he? Or how did Elena Belova, why is she at this point? Well, you had to watch Hawkeye. You had to watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That these play roles in the MCU proper. So I do, and I know this, I'm stating this because I know people who have asked me and they don't have Disney Plus. Oh, do I need to watch the show? I said, well, it would help. It would help. That's just like, well, I'll get to it. I'll get to that when we get to that. But yeah, it really hurt it. But as far as the film side, the theatrical side of everything, the first film to be released in the Multiverse Saga was Black Widow. And that was in 2021. And that movie, as much as I was all right with the movie wasn't bad. The movie just came out 5, maybe 6 years too late. If they would have put this out in beginning of phase 3, maybe the end of phase 2, it probably would have hit better, because that's when Black Widow was hot. The character was hot. Now you give her a solo movie after we just witnessed her die 2 years earlier in Avengers Endgame. It doesn't help. It didn't help the cause at all because that she's going to survive at the end of this movie. There's no stakes there. At least that's how I was looking at it, and I couldn't really get into it. There was no sense of urgency or danger for her character because I know she's going to survive this movie. So it didn't help the cause. I think that was just bad scheduling. They should have made that movie years ago, so it could have fit properly in the MCU timeline. And now the next film that was released by Marvel Studios was Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which is probably one of the best films to come out of this phase of this saga. It was amazing, and why they haven't made another Shang-Chi is beyond my mind. It's beyond my way of thinking. It is so good. So good. Yeah, it gets a little CGI messy at the end, but that film as a whole was amazing. I had such a good time with Shang-Chi. Not so much with the Eternals. Now, when I first saw the Eternals, I was like, okay, it's fine. It's fine. And I gave it a rare review. I remember when it came out. But when I think back now, I'm like, well, I was just craved for superhero movies at that time. You realize in 2021, due to the pandemic and everything, Marvel put out 4 movies in 2021. And so I was just all in on these comic book movies because for about a year and a half, we didn't get any. We didn't get nothing from Marvel. And so, yeah, I was just happy to see it. Now I look back, I was like, man, that movie was not that good. It wasn't. It wasn't really all that good. It was boring. The movie was boring, and everybody knows it. Marvel knows it. That's why you haven't heard a whisper of the Eternals. You haven't heard anything involving the Eternals in the MCU since that movie has come out. Just till recently with Captain America Brave New World that we finally see Tima, the Celestial, sticking out of the ocean. We finally got that reference after what, 4 years? In about 7, 8 movies later, you finally get a reference to it. But neither here nor there. Then you get Spider-Man No Way Home. Oh my God. Man, look, the fact that that movie exists is the reason I wake up every morning smiling. The fact that I was able to, God gave me the health and strength to get up, go to the theater, and watch it for the first time when it came out that weekend with a crowd, with the cheering, with, the first theatrical experience I've had since the pandemic. And that was the first time. That was in a long time that I felt like I was at the movies. And it was worth the wait. It was worth every second. I love that movie. Still to this day, I watch it at least once a year. It, it is so good. After that, you get Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which was kind of a letdown because you're promised this multiverse of madness, and all we got was madness. There was no multiverse. It was nothing there. It was no dare. It was just, yeah. It wasn't good. It wasn't bad. It was just, eh. you know. Uh, but it was better than Thor: Love and Thunder, which came out after that. That man, you want to talk about disappointing? I mean, you have Taika Waititi returning to direct after directing Thor Ragnarok, and once again, the promise of a bigger world. You got Christian Bale as the villain, and that was the best part of the movie. Him. The problem was he was the only one in the movie that realized he was in the movie. Everybody else was jokey, play. And look, it worked for Ragnarok. It didn't work here. This was so bad. I still wake up in night sweats thinking about Thor: Love and Thunder. After that, we get Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and clearly not as good as the first one, but not one to make excuses. But man, they had a lot going on with Ryan Coogler trying to make this movie. Ryan Coogler had to deal, first and foremost, he has to film this film during a pandemic. That's number one. Number two, right before they're about to start pre-production, we got the tragic passing of the star of the movie, Chadwick Boseman. He passes away, and that just put a monkey wrench into everything. Because now is the question: should we recast? Should they not? And they chose not to recast T'Challa. And look, I get it. In the moment, I fully supported that. But as time went on, I was like, no, because you have a great number of people who love that character, who didn't have a Clark Kent, didn't have a Bruce Wayne, didn't have a Tony Stark to look up to. They couldn't look in the mirror and see these characters in the mirror. But they can look in the mirror and see a T'Challa. They can look in the mirror and see a Black Panther. So that's why they should have recast it. I get the emotional aspect of it all and the respect factor of it all. I get that 100%. Chadwick Boseman was Black Panther, and he will always be Black Panther. He owned that role. He was amazing as the character of T'Challa. But They should have recast. If anything, just scrap this particular idea and waited a little while. Not just throw yourself into it. But in any event, you had those two, and then you shift gears to make Shiri the main character, which isn't a bad idea. This happened in the comics as well. This is a actual thing. Shiri did take over Black Panther for a while, so that's fine. But during filming, she caught COVID, and she ended up hurting herself in a stunt during filming. So those were two setbacks. Yeah, it was a whole mess. The mere fact that this movie wrapped and was cohesive and was actually entertaining for the most part, even though, like I said, wasn't nowhere near the first film, but it was good enough, is a miracle within itself. But you had that going, but that was the end of phase 4. So we moved to phase 5, and you get Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and this is where business picked up. This is where it really started to go off the rails. Quantumania was to set up the main villain of this saga. The multiverse saga was supposed to wrap up just like the Infinity Saga wrapped up with Thanos being the main bad. The Multiverse Saga was going to wrap up with Kang the Conqueror. And that character was played by Jonathan Majors. And Jonathan Majors is an amazing actor. Amazing actor. And when they first cast him, when they announced that, I'm like, I don't see it. At first, I was like, really? Out of everybody, y'all chose Jonathan Majors, Because at that time, he wasn't as big. I think around the time they announced that, he was on this show, Lovecraft Country, and I enjoyed that show. I hate the fact that it only lasted one season. That was a really good show. But I just didn't see him as Kang. So when this movie, when they started, releasing promotional material and stuff for it, I was like, okay, I'm sold. And I could see him as the bad. And then he popped up on Loki as He Who Remains. I was like, yep, I'm sold. This is going to work. Well, right before the release of this film, or it could have been, yeah, it was right before the release of Quantumania. That's when all of that, foolishness happened in his personal life involving the ex-girlfriend and the domestic abuse stuff and all this here. And that was that. Grand opening, grand closing. That was it for Jonathan Majors. And Marvel had to quickly course correct. And instead of recasting Kang the Conqueror, they just done away with him. They decided to move in a different direction. Now, I'm not going to fanboy out here, because I'm a huge Jonathan Majors fan. In spite of the stuff that he was accused of and he was found guilty of or pled to, whatever the case may be. If he was wrong, he was wrong. But, I mean, as far as the story, and it's not about Jonathan Majors. I feel if you was going to let him go, cast somebody else. Recast the role. Stick to your plan. Because when you course correct in the dead center middle of the thing, it's not going to play out right. And from that moment on, it felt like every other film just didn't matter. Even though the films that came out around this time, in 2023, they were already filmed, they were already done, but it just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel like this was part of the same saga. After Quantumania, you had Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which was great, a good wrap up to that trilogy. And then you had the Marvels. Just horrible. Just horrible. It just did not land. Did not land at all. The less said about that movie, the better. And then we move on to just this past year in 2024 with Deadpool and Wolverine. That worked. Now it worked in a degree. It didn't work for the overall MCU storytelling element wise, but it did work for Deadpool. You know, it worked as a love letter to all of the Fox X-Men films, which that's all it was. It was just a goodbye letter from the Fox universe of X-Men movies. And that's cool. That was cool. I loved it. But as far as pushing the MCU narrative forward, it did none of that. It did none of that. Captain America: Brave New World, they shouldn't have made that movie. That movie was so upsetting to me. It still bothers me to this day. I can't believe, and I watched it twice. I still cannot. I can't believe that movie was that bad. I really don't. I really don't know why they made this movie this way. And that movie went through so many reshoots and so many script changes and character changes and recasting in this role and that role, and that's what y'all came up with. You know, it just it crashed and burned. It crashed and burned, at least in my soul. Um, it, it didn't work. And so that brings us to the end. That brings us to the end of phase 5, where this upcoming weekend we get Thunderbolts. And that brings us to the question. Yeah, it took me 40 something minutes to get to it, but it brings us to the question. Can Marvel bounce back? Can we bounce back? Will Thunderbolts bring us back to what we've grown and loved from the first saga, from the first 3 phases of this franchise? You know, now not every film in the first 3 phases was bangers. Now, I'm gonna be fair and honest with you. I, Iron Man 2, it had its moments, but it wasn't great. Iron Man 3, same thing, had its moments, but it wasn't great. Thor: The Dark World, it it wasn't all that good. The Avengers: Age of Ultron was not the greatest. So it had some misses there. Ant-Man and the Wasp wasn't all that good either. It had its misses, but this saga, this complete saga, has crashed and burned. Now, I've seen a lot of articles, or read them, I should say, read a lot of articles where the finger pointing is directed towards Jonathan Majors derailing it and all this here. Let's not fool ourselves here. It was bad before all that Jonathan Majors mess came into play. It was already, the ship was already taking on water, with Eternals and the Black Widow thing, with Multiverse of Madness, the Thor: Love and Thunder. It was sinking. It was sinking. So I'm not gonna pin it on the Jonathan Majors thing. The Jonathan Majors thing just put an extra hole in the bow of the ship. It just took on more water, and from that point on, it was just best to abandon ship instead of trying to get it to port. But now I think this is an opportunity. I think this is a chance that we can get back on track. Thunderbolts looks fun. I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to see it tomorrow. It looks fun. And it just feels, from the trailers, from the clips they released, it feels like an old school Marvel film. And I say old school like it was 50 years ago, but the first 3 phases. And so I'm encouraged by it. And then later this year, a couple of months from now, actually in July, we get the Fantastic Four First Steps, which is the first Marvel Fantastic Four film from the MCU proper. And you have Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, and Jonathan Quinn. You have some good additions here. Max Shackman directing. Galactics is in this thing. Silver Surfer is in this thing. It looks amazing, and it looks exciting. So I'm encouraged. And then next year we get Doomsday, Avengers Doomsday, and this is where Robert Downey Jr. returns. as Victor Von Doom. No, not Tony Stark, Victor Von Doom. And for that reason, I'm not excited for that, as a lot of MCU fans are, but I am deeply intrigued. I am so curious to see how they're going to explain this and pull this off. Now, can Robert Downey Jr. pull off Doctor Doom? Of course he can. But the problem I have, we've grown and loved him for nearly 20 years as Tony Stark. We saw him have the greatest arc in film franchise history as this warmonger, who sells weapons to whoever, to sacrificing himself for the sake of the universe. The greatest arc ever. And then now you're gonna bring him back as the villain. It's weird, and there's no proper introduction here. I guess technically this is his movie, but we don't have enough time to kind of soak him in like we did with Thanos, in the first saga. So that's the only thing that kind of gives me pause on it. That's why I'm not excited floating over the moon about it. But I am super interested. Then we get the return of Spider-Man after Doomsday. Spider-Man Brand New Day. Tom Holland is returning. Dustin Daniel Cretton is directing this film. He's the director of Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings. So I already told you how much I enjoyed that film. So what he going to bring to Spider-Man? Is he going to bring that same energy? I hope so, because that was a fun energy he brought to that film. Let's see where that ends. And then we wrap up this entire saga with Avengers Secret Wars in 2027. Now, that film, if done like the comics, is going to be the biggest movie of all time. I'm talking production wise. It's going to be huge if it's done like it's done in the comics. And so, yes, they have a way, and it will rival Endgame if they do it right. But everything, guys, it has to work from here on. If Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four fail, crash and burn, it doesn't even, the rest of this don't even matter. Doomsday don't even matter. Secret Wars don't even matter. That's how important these films are, and I don't think they should be taken lightly. Only if you're a fan of this franchise. If you don't care, if you're just a casual viewer of these films, you probably could care less. But if you follow each and every film tooth to nail, if you watch every Disney Plus show religiously, follow this like you would follow a comic series. If a new issue drops on a Tuesday, you're there. That's, if you follow it like that, yeah, this is important. This is very important. But I'm encouraged. I actually feel good moving forward because, like I said, the next two films looks good. Looks good. I'm not expecting Thunderbolts to be the Captain America Civil War. I don't expect it to be that high. I expect it to be, if it's as good as Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which is not as good as the first one, definitely not as good as the third one, but it's good enough. It was entertaining. I actually liked it, but I didn't love it like I loved the first one and loved the second one. If it's as good, if it's on that level of Volume 2 of Guardians of the Galaxy, we're good. We're in good shape. So that's my hope and prayer. And now after Secret Wars, nothing is really quote unquote announced. They have a planned Armor Wars movie with Don Cheadle returning as War Machine. You have Black Panther 3. Now that has been announced. Ryan Coogler is returning to write and direct that film, and there will be a T'Challa in that movie. So that ought to be interesting to see how that go. Blade, my God. Blade has been announced, but there is no date. There's no movement on production. They have been. I have nothing to say about Blade. But anyways, you have the X-Men. The X-Men is coming soon. No dates on that, no real casting on that, but I think a lot will be determined after Secret Wars. After Secret Wars, we're gonna spawn off into the mutant saga. And I think a lot of it will focus on the X-Men and mutants going forward in this next saga. They really should have did that instead of the multiverse saga. Maybe save the multiverse saga till later. But that's fine. You know, can't pour the milk back in the in the carton now. But yeah, that's why I think Black Panther 3 is coming out around this time, because we're going to get the introduction of Storm, I believe, in that film. You know, Blade isn't a mutant, but that'll be a nice way to introduce some new mutant characters and whatnot. So there's a lot to play with here. Can't wait to see what happens, but I am excited for Thunderbolts and what it can offer. It just feels like a grounded superhero film that we haven't gotten in a while. We've been in the multiverse, you know. We've been in galaxies. We have superhuman people. All of these characters in this film are grounded. You know, they're more relatable. And I think that will help this film succeed. But yes, my answer to the question is yes, I have faith. I have confidence that the MCU will indeed rebound and get back to prominence. I would like to know, what do you think going forward? Are you excited for Thunderbolts and the Fantastic Four and the 2 new Avengers films that are coming down the pike soon? I would love to know your thoughts. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel on YouTube. Like this video if you don't mind. Also, don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, the sharing if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me as we pose the question, can Marvel Studios bounce back? I want you all to know that I love you, continue to love everyone, and until we speak again, you all be blessed.